Hey guys, tonight we're heading into the fragrant, slightly obsessive world of Byzantine purple dye, a color so treasured, so political, and so surprisingly stinky, you'll be grateful this is an audio experience. You find yourself in Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul. It's the year 537 CE, and the air is thick with incense, market shouts, and the low clink of sandals over marble. Sunlight slants off golden domes. Everything gleams, except the imperial guards in the corner, who look extremely ready to detain anyone wearing the wrong robe. Because here in the Byzantine Empire, purple isn't just a shade, it's a statement. A bold, bright, don't even look at it without permission statement. This is a city where colors speak. Blue and green signal your chariot racing allegiance. White robes. Clergy, probably sober. But deep, lustrous purple? That's reserved for the emperor, his family, and exactly no one else. You probably won't survive this. By the way, if you walk into the forum wrapped in Tyrian purple, your fashion crime might land you in a dungeon. Or worse, fashion court. Which, oddly enough, is very real in this world. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me, where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it over there? I love hearing where this sleepy little community stretches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge past the towering columns of the great palace. A silk banner flaps overhead, catching a strange, metallic light, like the surface of oil floating on water. It's purple, but not like anything in your closet. It's more like the color royalty would choose if they were trying to intimidate a rainbow. You pass under an arch carved with battle scenes, your footsteps echoing in a long corridor. This city is old. Even back then, it was already a fusion of Roman legacy and Eastern flair. But despite the clamor and chaos, everything here bends toward order. And order, in Byzantium, has a color code. Purple is reserved for emperors, and occasionally their immediate blood relatives. This isn't a flexible guideline. It's an imperial law. Like how parking in the emperor's spot gets you towed, except here, the punishment is a little more terminal. In the palace, deep inside a ceremonial hall known as the chrysotriclinos, the emperor sits beneath a golden dome wearing a purple robe so thick it could probably stand up on its own. The fabric is heavy, embroidered with gold thread, and smells faintly of sea brine. Here's a strange fact. The Byzantine term for emperor was basileus, and some of them were literally born in the purple, meaning born in a special porphyry chamber lined with purple marble. Talk about setting high expectations. There's a Greek phrase for it, porphyrogenitus. Say it softly. It sounds like a spell, or maybe the name of a wizard's pet iguana. You keep walking. A servant bows and hurries past you, carrying what looks like a roll of purple silk under his arm. He's sweating profusely. Whether it's the weight of the fabric or the weight of responsibility, you can't tell. The Byzantines inherited their purple madness from the ancient Phoenicians, but they cranked it up to 11. They didn't just use it for robes. They painted it on manuscripts, dyed church curtains with it, and even used it as a diplomatic flex. Sending a purple-cloaked envoy to another empire? That's how you silently scream, "We're better than you," without actually raising your voice. Historians still argue whether the Byzantines truly believed purple was divine, or whether it was just really effective branding. Either way, it worked. The empire lasted over 1,000 years. You have to admit, That's a pretty solid return on investment for a glorified sea slug dye. You make your way to the harbor. The scent of salt and fish hits you like a damp pillow. Down by the docks, bundles of raw cloth arrive from the east, ready to be dyed in one of the city's secret workshops. These places are carefully monitored. Unauthorized dyeing? That'll get you a fine, or maybe a trip to the Imperial Laundry for some re-education. And here's the kicker, most commoners don't even know what real Tyrian purple looks like. It's like caviar in a world of lentils. You might see an imitation now and then, made from berries or madder root, but it fades like gossip at a silent retreat. Meanwhile, real imperial purple doesn't fade. Ever. You could leave it on a rock for a decade and it would still look smug about being more fabulous than you. The Byzantines weren't just obsessed with color, they were obsessed with symbols. They understood that power isn't just wielded. It's performed. And nothing performed quite like a gleaming purple robe walking slowly through a golden hallway, while flanked by guards who would absolutely throw you off a balcony for asking where it was made. And so you keep walking, past domes and arches, past scribes and beggars, all the way to the edge of the hippodrome where colored factions scream themselves hoarse for their favorite racers. Even here, amidst chaos and popcorn vendors, purple reigns. You sit on a marble bench, watching as a priest passes by in crimson, a baker in olive green, and finally, a senator in dark plum, just close enough to purple that it draws a few wary glances. The sun is setting now, and the whole city glows. Gold, stone, and yes, just a hint of imperial purple. You lean back, eyes drooping, thoughts swimming in silken hues. You wake, or rather, float, into the next moment, drifting past torchlit corridors and moonlit mosaics as the city hushes around you. Now let's go back in time, even further. Before Byzantium got its imperial branding team involved, before the word purple meant anything more than a color crushed from something vaguely gross, there were mollusks. Lots and lots of smelly mollusks. Imagine this, you're standing on a rocky Phoenician coastline around 1500 BCE. The waves crash against the cliffs near the city of Tyre. The wind smells like salt, damp stone, and, okay, something way worse. That's because you're near a purple dye workshop, and trust me, you'll want to breathe through your mouth. In the sun, heaps of rotting shellfish bake like some kind of ancient revenge prank. These are murex snails, the not-so-glamorous secret behind the glamour. Workers are cracking open thousands, literally thousands, of these spiny little sea creatures to harvest a teeny drop of mucus from a special gland inside each one. The scene is a cross between a seafood buffet and a crime scene. You watch a laborer hold up one glistening, sad-looking mollusk, carefully pierce it with a tiny tool, and squeeze out a single bead of milky fluid. Doesn't look purple yet. That comes later, after a nice long bath in sunlight and air exposure, during which the mucus oxidizes and transforms into a deep, reddish purple that stains everything it touches. Including your fingers, if you get too curious. And here's your quirky tidbit of the day, that initial secretion? It smells like decaying fish mixed with old garlic. There's even ancient writing complaining about the odor. If historical complaints had Yelp reviews, Tyrian dye workshops would have been 1 star with frequent mentions of eye-watering stench and mysterious purple puddles near my goat. But the result? Priceless. Literally. In some cases, a single ounce of Tyrian purple cost more than gold. So you can understand why it was called royal purple. Or why you'd need an empire's worth of mollusks to make a single toga. Historians still argue whether the Phoenicians discovered this by accident, Maybe they stepped on the wrong snail and noticed the color, or whether it was a long, experimental process fueled by equal parts curiosity and poor ventilation. You wander through a dye workshop now, your sandals sticking slightly to the stone floor. The workers wear old robes, already stained permanently purple at the cuffs. They seem oddly calm about the smell, like people who've made peace with their life choices, or lost their sense of smell in week 2. One of them nods at you and gestures to a row of giant clay vats. The liquid inside glows faintly reddish in the firelight. Bubbles pop on the surface. It's like witchcraft, but smellier. You lean over a vat. A worker grabs your shoulder before you dip a finger in, not out of concern for you, but because they don't want you contaminating the batch. This stuff's too valuable for casual dipping. The cloth is lowered in, left to soak, then pulled out shimmering and transformed. It darkens in the air, turning from pale mauve to a bruised plum, and eventually, if it's a good batch, a deep, gleaming purple like the shell of a scarab beetle. That's the moment the master dyer nods. Success. You step back out onto the docks. Even now, in this earlier century, guards patrol the storage crates. Theft is a serious concern. Purple dye is both wealth and weapon. And the people of Tyre know how to use it. They trade it across the Mediterranean, exchanging little jars of dye for timber, metal, and spices. Slowly but surely, purple spreads, first to Egyptian elites, then Greek aristocrats, and eventually Roman emperors. You hop on a creaky Phoenician ship now, sail fluttering with wind and the scent of brine. The captain grumbles in a language older than Latin. On board, tucked into a sealed chest lined with wax and cloth, are 6 sealed amphorae of Tyrian dye. If pirates boarded right now, forget the gold, they'd be fighting over that stinky treasure. As the coast of Tyre fades behind you, the waves shimmer with pinkish light from the setting sun. You watch the sky darken, feeling how a simple sea snail, mashed and fermented, became a symbol of status, religion, and later, Byzantine obsession. The transition from Phoenician traders to Roman emperors wasn't immediate. The Greeks had their moments with purple too. Some city-states allowed magistrates to wear purple-edged togas. But Rome? Rome took that idea and ran with it. Or strutted, more likely. You time-skip ahead again, now wandering the streets of ancient Rome in the 1st century CE. Overhead, banners flutter from temple columns. Senators in white togas with thin purple stripes discuss taxes while trying not to trip over their own hems. And in the center of it all? The emperor, wearing a toga picta, dyed solid purple, embroidered with gold. A walking fortune. You learn something curious here. Roman law actually restricted who could wear purple. Sound familiar? That tradition would pass down to Byzantium, where it would evolve into a full-blown imperial fixation. But back in Rome, the color was already causing a bit of fashion drama. According to Suetonius, Rome's favorite gossipy historian, Emperor Caligula got so annoyed with someone wearing a shade too close to imperial purple, he had the poor guy stripped in public and banned from appearing in togas altogether. That's what you call a wardrobe malfunction with consequences. You sit now in a Roman bathhouse, steamy and echoing. Purple towels hang on a peg in the private chamber, definitely reserved for someone richer than you. A senator passes, adjusting his robe with pride, probably unaware that he's basically wrapped in snail juice. The dye continues its journey, from Phoenicia to Rome, and then to Byzantium, where it would become less about fashion and more about identity. You close your eyes. The smells fade. The colors soften. You followed the stench of glory. And it's just getting started. you find yourself now stepping through the grand gates of Constantinople, around the 5th century CE. The air feels different here, saltier, somehow cleaner than Tyre's dye vats, but still laced with incense and the faint bite of sea breeze. You're inside a city that smells of ambition, marble, and bureaucracy. The streets gleam with polished limestone. Gold mosaics shimmer in doorways. But your eyes are pulled, unavoidably, to the deep, commanding color of the emperor's banners fluttering from the highest tower. That unmistakable purple. Not lavender. Not violet. This is the purple that speaks Latin without having to open its mouth. By now, purple dye wasn't just clothing, it was branding. It was ideology. It was mood lighting for political control. The Byzantines, always lovers of ceremony and subtle intimidation, took the Roman obsession and gave it their signature twist, exclusivity turned up to 11. If Rome had purple laws, Byzantium had purple laws with footnotes. This is when you hear the phrase "born in the purple." It drifts through the palace halls like a password. Porphyrogenitos. Say it slowly. It refers to imperial children born while their father was ruling emperor. That's right, your royal blood wasn't enough. To be truly elite, you had to be born in the purple. In an actual purple-colored room, mind you. A marble chamber in the imperial palace, clad with porphyry stone, the darkest, most majestic purple rock the empire could afford. Historians still argue whether the room was actually purple draped at all times or if purple was more metaphorical by the end. Either way, you didn't get the label unless your birth certificate matched the political timeline. You peek through the curtains of that sacred birthing chamber now. It's quiet, dim, and filled with embroidered pillows that cost more than a fleet of ships. The walls glow faintly reddish, smooth and cool to the touch. There are no windows, no light to fade the symbolism. Only a flickering oil lamp casts a golden shimmer across the stone. It's a womb within a palace within a city. In this room, power is born, or at least branded. But don't worry, you haven't been locked in. You wander the outer palace now, past rooms with names like the Hall of the 19 Couches and the Chrysotriclinos. The place reads like someone threw a wedding planner and a battle map into a blender. Everywhere, you see purple. A sash here, a banner there. But always with restraint. No one dares wear too much of it, unless, of course, they are the emperor. Or they have a death wish. Because now, the dye is regulated. Severely. Purple became so associated with imperial identity that laws were written specifically to prevent its misuse. Unauthorized possession could be considered treason. And treason, in Byzantium, wasn't something you got a slap on the wrist for. More like a gentle goodbye to your fingers. You hear whispers about a silversmith once caught with a bolt of purple silk. Rumors say he was flogged in the hippodrome. Another tale tells of a senator's wife whose purple-lined veil stirred so much jealousy, the whole garment was confiscated mid-procession. Oddly enough, it wasn't always the emperor himself who wore it the most. Often, it was limited to ceremonial occasions, public parades, coronations, or moments of state drama. Think of it as a regal power-up outfit, high visual impact, limited use. Because if everyone saw you in purple all the time, the magic wore off. You stroll now through the imperial wardrobe, or as the Byzantines called it, the vestiarium. It's not your average walk-in closet. It's a climate-controlled treasury of textiles, supervised by eunuchs with remarkable memory and zero tolerance for fashion faux pas. In one corner, A long chest holds bolts of silk dyed so richly they appear almost black in low light. These aren't pretty purples, they're commanding. Some are embroidered with gold thread, forming double-headed eagles and saints with slightly judgmental faces. You pause beside one of the garments. It's heavy. Not just with fabric, but with rules, legacy, and maybe a tiny sprinkle of snail ghost. A clerk walks past, murmuring something about dye quotas and shipment delays from the eastern provinces. The dye itself, you now realize, still comes from the Levant, though the process has become more centralized and secretive. Some scholars suggest the empire guarded its dye-making techniques as tightly as it did its military strategies. And now you understand, purple isn't just color. It's code. A Byzantine QR code of status, birthright, and who you can and can't sit next to at dinner. Here's a curious little detail: there were occasional reports of fraudulent dyers. People who tried to fake the hue using cheaper dyes, madder root, woad, or heaven forbid, beet juice. These fakers faced stiff penalties if caught. You imagine some poor apprentice holding up a slightly pinkish tunic, praying the light in the council chamber was dim enough to pass. Historians still debate whether some of the purples we see in preserved mosaics today are true Tyrian or clever imitations that aged better under museum lights. Either way, you're reminded that even color fades, power, too, but the idea of purple remained eternal. Now you step outside again. The sun is setting over Constantinople. The Sea of Marmara glitters in the distance. A child runs past with a kite made of rags. No purple on him, of course not. But he glances at the palace windows and waves anyway, as if purple is watching. You follow your feet down a quiet side street. The marble gives way to cobblestones, and the mosaics to painted plaster. You pass tailors and dye merchants, many of whom only work in legal shades: rust, navy, teal. Purple? Off the menu. Unless you know a guy. Somewhere, in the shadows, deals are made. Not everything in Byzantium glows gold and regal. There are whispers of rogue looms. Purple cloth tucked into spice crates. Smugglers with royal ambitions. You duck into a tavern just before curfew. The room is smoky and humming with low laughter. A lute plays in the background. And in the corner, beneath a flickering lamp, a trader unfurls a tiny swatch of forbidden purple, just for a second. Everyone leans in. No one breathes. And then it's gone. You wake early the next day to the sound of bells, deep, bronze-tone chimes rolling across Constantinople like gentle thunder. Morning in the imperial capital is no less theatrical than its royal ceremonies. You pad along a narrow street toward the harbor side, still sleepy, but the scent of baking bread and olive oil is strong enough to tug your senses awake. Today, you're heading to the heart of Byzantine silk production, tucked somewhere behind unmarked doors and guarded corridors. It's not so much a factory as it is a closely watched fortress of trade secrets. You'll see why. But first, coffee. Well, not exactly. Byzantines didn't have coffee yet. That delight wouldn't sweep the Eastern world until centuries later. For now, you sip on a strange barley infusion, slightly bitter, warmed in a copper pot. You pretend it's a latte. History is flexible when you're still half asleep. Now, onto the silk. You duck into the ergasterion, a kind of imperial silk workshop, where clattering looms fill the air with a sound like wooden rain. The weavers barely glance up, they're used to curious eyes and occasional inspection. Their hands move like practiced musicians, lifting warp threads, tossing shuttles, knotting gold strands into weft. It's hypnotic. And yes, there's purple here, tucked behind heavier curtains. The imperial silks are woven in secrecy, not just for privacy but to protect against pattern theft. Think of it as an ancient version of watermarking your digital art. You peer at a half-finished tunic on a frame. It's vivid, commanding, rich with stylized crosses and lions. The purple is deep, almost velvety. Threads of real gold loop through it in symmetrical rhythms. One wrong move, and the entire pattern misaligns. It's more math than fashion. Here's the wild part. For centuries, Byzantium's silk industry was sustained by silkworms smuggled into the empire from China, hidden in hollowed-out walking sticks by monks who probably didn't expect to go down in textile history. This high-stakes cloak and dagger cocoon heist occurred in the 6th century and revolutionized Byzantine economics. Historians still argue whether the worms themselves or just the eggs were transported, or whether the monks even knew how hard it would be to keep the little larvae alive through mountain passes and desert crossings. Either way, by the time you arrive in this tale, silk production is thriving. The imperial government controls it all, from who gets the worms to who's allowed to sell the thread. This makes purple dye even more exclusive. You don't just need snails, you need silk. And not just any silk, the good stuff. You glance around and notice a woman in her 60s supervising the dyeing process. Her fingers are stained, her apron threadbare, but her voice carries weight. She's part chemist, part priestess, carefully monitoring heat, ratios, and that ineffable quality called eye. If the purple is too light, it's rejected. Too dark, and it risks looking black in candlelight. Balance is everything. In the far corner, a long vat simmers quietly. A haze of vapor rises, slightly acrid, slightly fishy. You recognize the scent. Tyrian purple. The workers ladle it gently, avoiding splashes. Even one drop wasted is a small fortune lost. You crouch to peek inside. It's not pretty. A lumpy soup of fermented snail glands, seawater, and mystery enzymes. But the alchemy it produces? Radiant. Here's a weird one for your trivia stash. Apparently, some recipes for enhancing the color included urine. Human, if you're wondering. You blink and pull back just a little from the edge of the vat. Suddenly the barley drink from earlier doesn't seem so bitter. You learn that even with all this regulation, there's still a thriving black market for purple silk. Some foreign ambassadors are granted purple as a diplomatic gift. Others, not so much. One unlucky envoy from the Abbasid Caliphate was rumored to have smuggled purple robes in his luggage. When the customs officials caught him, the robes were burned in front of his tent. The message was clear: purple wasn't just rare, it was sacred. You step outside again and catch sight of a merchant ship docked in the harbor. Sailors unload crates from Alexandria and Antioch, careful not to tip over the amphory of oil and dates. A customs inspector checks each cargo list. His eyes linger longest on crates marked with unfamiliar sigils, especially if they might contain dye. You overhear a heated whisper between two dockworkers. Someone tried to bribe a guard to look the other way. A crate marked olive paste smelled suspiciously briny. Turns out it was raw dye concentrate. It was confiscated before sundown, and no one's seen the merchant since. The empire doesn't just guard its color, it polices it with a vengeance. But not everything's heavy-handed. As you wander through the bazaar, you spot legal, softer purples. Lavender-dyed linens, plum-tinted wool cloaks. These hues fall just beneath the radar of forbidden luxury. The dye merchants smile politely but never answer when you ask too many questions. They know how close the line runs. Your stomach growls. You pick up a honeyed pastry from a corner stand and sit beside a sun-warmed pillar. The vendor hums a tune, swatting flies away with a fan made from peacock feathers. A boy runs by wearing a sash of faint violet, probably beet-dyed, harmless. But a guard still raises an eyebrow. It's not just about the color. It's about who gets to wear meaning. And you finally get it. In Byzantium, purple isn't just a pigment. It's a language. One spoken without words. One that tells everyone in the room who matters, who doesn't, and who'd better keep their eyes on the floor. The bell rings again. It's dusk now. The harbor glows amber. You feel the weight of centuries behind you, wrapped in color, silence, and ceremonial thread. That evening, as shadows stretch across Constantinople and lanterns flicker to life along the Misi, the city's grand main thoroughfare, you follow a slow-moving procession toward the Blachurni Palace. No fanfare this time. Just routine government business. But it's not the emperor you're curious about tonight. It's the people around him, the bureaucrats, eunuchs, and noble families who revolve, like careful planets, around the empire's purple sun. The emperor, you learn, doesn't just wear purple. He is purple. Quite literally. Some rulers are called porphyrogenitos, born in the purple. Not a metaphor. It means they were born inside a specific chamber of the great palace, its walls clad in polished porphyry stone, a deep, imperial purple that glimmers like the inside of a conch shell. Imagine your birth certificate reading, room color, supreme. Now imagine being raised in a system where your very existence is marketed like a luxury brand. That's what being born into purple meant. You pass a quiet courtyard, cool marble underfoot, and watch as a scribe carefully inks a new decree. Even the ink, you note, is tinted slightly violet, no accident. Officials say it's symbolic. You suspect it's also a flex. Here's the odd thing. Purple didn't always mean royalty. In earlier Rome, it started out as a status marker for certain magistrates and high-ranking officials. Senators wore narrow purple stripes on their togas. Only later did it get monopolized, then weaponized, by emperors. Byzantium just took that idea, draped it in velvet, sprinkled in some gold thread, and locked the dye recipe in a vault. The porphyry room, by the way, wasn't exactly cozy. Historians still argue whether it was ever truly functional as a birthing space or more of a symbolic claim, like checking into the Ritz for a few hours just to say you did. Some speculate it was cold and ceremonial, used only briefly during delivery. Others insist it became a full-on nursery. Either way, it worked. The claim stuck. A breeze wafts in from the Marmara Sea. You wrap your cloak tighter. Two noble women pass by, their headdresses stiff with pearls, their robes edged with legally permitted colors, wine red, pale indigo, nothing close to imperial purple. One catches your eye and smiles faintly, as if to say, "Don't worry. We're surviving this costume party too." You settle into a low stone bench and reflect. Byzantine society was obsessed with appearances. But not in a shallow way. Clothing wasn't just about wealth, it mapped your position on the imperial chessboard. A wrongly colored tunic could spark gossip. A misplaced tassel might earn you a suspicious visit from the palace guard. And yet, people found ways to play. One noble, frustrated with the rules, once commissioned a robe made of dyed feathers, every shade except purple, just to make a statement. Another is rumored to have lined his private chamber walls in plum silk as a passive-aggressive protest. The fabric never saw daylight. But he knew it was there. Even the church got involved. Bishops wore purple robes for certain feast days, but only with imperial permission. It became a kind of spiritual one-upmanship, whose authority, after all, came first, God's or the emperor's. The debate was ongoing, polite, and intensely embroidered. And speaking of embroidery, have you ever tried gold thread embroidery by candlelight? You watch as an elderly craftsman threads gold filament through spun silk, humming under his breath. His fingers move like water over the fabric, each stitch a prayer, or maybe a low-key political statement. It's impossible to tell. This robe, he explains softly, is for a coronation anniversary. 20 years on the throne. The design includes four-winged seraphim, lions of Judah, and, surprise, purple lattice borders. Just enough to suggest divinity. Not enough to trigger a fine. You ask if he ever gets bored. He chuckles. Only when I try to sleep. Fair enough? Dinner is a quiet affair tonight. You nibble on lentils with mint, a few slices of fig, and a wedge of salted cheese. It's simple food, but delicious. Byzantines weren't known for gluttony, well, except for that one emperor who supposedly ate 16 roasted larks a day. But hey, larks are small. Maybe he just needed protein. As you sip a diluted wine, more water than grape, you realize something strange. You're starting to like the obsession. It's oddly calming. Predictable. Everyone knows their place. The rules may be rigid, but they're clear. Wear the wrong color? Big problem. Pay your tailor properly? No worries. Dye with the right mollusk? Instant respect. You hear rumors of a rogue dyer down by the Theodosian walls, someone blending Tyrian with indigo to create a cheaper dupe. The trick, apparently, is masking the smell. His customers call it twilight silk. It won't fool an official, but for dinner parties? Perfect. And then there are the collectors. Retired generals who buy scraps of genuine imperial silk and frame them. Relics of a system they once fought for. You even hear about one who wore a square of purple inside his boot, where no one could see it. Just to feel royal. Secret Rebellion, Sock Edition. As the stars prick the sky above Hagia Sophia's great dome, you walk slowly back to your quarters, footfalls echoing on flagstone. A cat slinks past, tail high, clearly unimpressed by your insights. Cats have no need for purple. They're born with delusions of grandeur already. You crawl onto a low cot and pull a blanket around your shoulders. The city sighs outside. Somewhere, another robe is being stitched. Another guard watches for forbidden dyes. And in a quiet chamber near the palace, a newborn squalls against cold porphyry walls. The world keeps turning, stitched, dyed, and hemmed with rules. And always, just a little, in purple. Morning slides gently into the city, soft golden light warming the rooftops and stone streets of Constantinople. You blink awake to the smell of yeast and olives drifting up from a baker's stall and the low murmur of market chatter, but your thoughts are already ahead, following the trail of the most elusive part of the purple story, the dye itself. See, it's one thing to wear purple. It's another thing entirely to make it. You make your way down toward the Harborside district, where the city breathes in goods from the world. The air here is sharper, saltier, tinged with tar, brine, and something funky. You follow the smell. That unmistakable smell. There, tucked behind a modest warehouse, lies what you've come for, the old dye vats. Tyrian purple, more sacred than saffron, more expensive than gold, and somehow, disturbingly fishy. That's because the color comes from the murex, a small sea snail with a big secret. When poked just right, and honestly, who figured that out first, it oozes a milky fluid. Left to ferment, it turns green, then blue, and eventually, purple. Deep, rich, near immortal purple. But the smell? Oh, the smell. You peer over the edge of one old vat, long dry now. The mason points at a nearby pit and winces theatrically. That one, we burned the clothes afterward, he says. Even the thought of it clung to the skin. Byzantines didn't invent this dye, of course. The Phoenicians did, centuries earlier in places like Tyre, hence the name. But the Byzantines did what they always did, took something old and made it divine. They turned dye into dogma. You walk slowly along a row of storage jars, imagining them once packed with murex shells by the thousand. Historians still argue whether workers crushed the snails completely or just milked them individually, like the world's most patient, most cursed milking operation. Either way, you needed tens of thousands for a single robe. Let that sink in. Imagine wrangling 12,000 sea snails just to hem your sleeves. No wonder only emperors wore it. And this wasn't fast fashion. The dyeing process took weeks. First came the snail harvesting, often by divers with clothespins on their noses and a strong stomach. Then came the extraction, the aging, the exposure to sunlight. Purple, like revenge, was best served slow. You pass a work table where a few remnants of cloth sit faded and brittle. One is still tinged faintly violet, like a bruised petal. The dyer next to you shakes his head. It used to shine like fire at sunset, he says. Now? Just a ghost. They say the best Tyrian purple shimmered in the light, shifting between wine, eggplant, and ink. Some fabrics looked nearly black indoors but burst into vivid plum in the sun. It wasn't just color, it was performance. And of course, it reeked. So when your neighbor in the bathhouse showed up in freshly dyed purple, you didn't just admire him, you smelled his tax bracket. Bathhouses, by the way, were where many Byzantines showed off their wealth, and yes, clothes mattered, even when naked. Robes were folded just so on the benches, with the most ostentatious bits artfully displayed. Nothing said power like lounging in lavender haze while sipping spiced wine and debating Christological heresies. The dye wasn't only for robes, though. You learned that it colored banners, cushion covers, gospel bindings, and imperial shoes. A full imperial outfit was like a walking dye factory, rich, royal, and just pungent enough to clear a room. And woe to anyone who faked it. Byzantine law was obsessed with who could wear what. Several edicts punished the unauthorized use of purple with exile, fines, or worse. In one case, a rebellious noble was caught with a stolen purple cloak and stripped of his titles. Another was forced to donate his offending garment to the church, a color swap for salvation. Still, the rules couldn't stop ambition. Black market purple flourished, particularly in border towns. Some dyers concocted dupes using madder root, indigo, and even fermented berries. It wasn't the real deal, but it was close enough to cause headaches for palace spies. You sip a sweet raisin wine in a tavern near the dye quarter, listening to a grizzled sailor recount a smuggling tale, barrels of anchovy paste filled with illicit fabric. The crew swore it was for charity. Customs wasn't convinced. Nobody ever found the captain's hat again. There's something almost touching about how far people would go for a color. It wasn't about vanity, it was about belonging. Or at least appearing to. One scholar claimed that people feared purple the way they feared fire. It mesmerized and destroyed. Another wrote that Tyrian purple was the color of Olympus slipping into human cloth. Sounds dramatic, but you get the point. You step back outside into the late afternoon sun. The city feels warmer, heavier, the way places do when you know their secrets. The streets hum with quiet energy, merchants bartering, children laughing, the distant clatter of hooves over cobblestone. You notice a small piece of cloth hanging in a window, a faded strip of once purple silk. The woman tending the shop sees your gaze and shrugs. My grandmother's, she says. Never wore it. Just kept it near the olives. She smiles faintly. For luck? And you wonder, maybe purple was luck. Or maybe it was just another dream woven by people too tired to chase the real thing. Either way, the empire wore it well. Evening stretches its long, golden fingers across the skyline as you wind your way uphill toward the palace. The streets quiet slightly, as if even Constantinople knows not to shout too loudly near imperial walls. A few muffled laughs float from a nearby inn, but your thoughts are elsewhere, on the shimmering heart of Byzantine power and the purple-cloaked souls who ruled it. Yes, the emperors. Let's talk about them. Specifically, let's talk about how obsessed they were with purple. Not just their clothes. Not just their thrones. The Byzantines wove purple into the very DNA of their monarchy. And it all begins in a bedroom. You slip through a corridor of the great palace, with a friendly nod from the world's least enthusiastic guard, and your guide gestures toward a nondescript chamber, the famed porphyra. The purple room. Literally lined in porphyry, a deep reddish-purple stone hauled all the way from Egypt. It was here, only here, that empresses were permitted to give birth to legitimate imperial heirs. Because being born into royalty wasn't enough. In Byzantium, you had to be born in purple. The phrase porphyrogenitus meant just that, born in the purple. It was an official title, reserved for sons, and occasionally daughters, delivered in that sacred stone chamber. You're not just royal. You're royal plus ultra. A kind of dynasty superpower. Historians still argue whether the porphyra was more symbolic than practical. It may not have been comfortable or even that sanitary, but it didn't matter. Symbolism was everything. Being born elsewhere meant you were technically a usurper's child, even if your dad had a full beard and a very sharp sword. You sip a cup of cold cinnamon wine and imagine that poor midwife in the porphyry room, whispering apologies as she tried to muffle the screams of labor. Shh, your imperial radiance. We mustn't wake the court eunuchs. Purple birth or not, the emperors wore their royalty just as seriously. Robes? Check. Tunics, cloaks, boots, even saddles, all trimmed with Tyrian purple. But it wasn't just for show. It was protocol. Everything had meaning. A single miscolored hem could spark a diplomatic incident. You're not kidding. That did happen. And don't even think about entering the throne room in red or violet. Those shades were for the imperial family only. One careless bishop who did was swiftly escorted out and made to change into something more monastic. Inside the palace, purple wasn't just fashion. It was direction. The emperor's throne faced a backdrop of shimmering purple silk. Purple curtains marked his private quarters. Foreign ambassadors were often gifted purple-wrapped scrolls, purple seals, or tokens embroidered with imperial crests in, you guessed it, purple thread. One such crest, you learn, featured a double-headed eagle stitched entirely in Tyrian silk. The cloth reportedly shimmered so vividly that a Polish emissary once described it as seeing lightning held in velvet. You chuckle softly at that. Who knew color could be so intimidating? One of the most famous born in the purple figures was Constantine VII. A quiet scholar by day, he spent more time writing cookbooks and diplomatic manuals than leading armies. But oh, did he love his symbolism. His manuscripts practically ooze purple ink. His dining hall was rumored to have purple mosaics of grapes and fish, so finely tiled they made visitors dizzy. And let's not forget his fashion sense, long flowing robes that made him look like a sentient eggplant under candlelight. But regal, you know. A very expensive eggplant. Interestingly, even emperors who weren't born in the purple worked hard to fake the aura. They'd drape themselves in double layers, commission exaggerated tapestries, and, this is true, some hired bards to chant poems about their blessed porphyric glow. It was purple propaganda. And it wasn't limited to the men. Empresses, too, understood the game. Take Theodora, wife of Justinian. Born in far humbler surroundings, she knew the power of purple was more than silk, it was story. She commissioned frescoes in Ravenna with her wearing a magnificent purple robe, gold thread curling down the front like falling starlight. Her expression? Calm, poised, don't even think about challenging me, serene. She may not have been born in the purple, but she made the color hers. By now, you're passing through one of the older gardens near the palace, where pomegranate trees bow under the weight of ripe fruit. A few petals flutter down from the high walls, pink and white, but you can't help imagining them deep violet instead, soft as cloth and just as meaningful. There's something gently absurd about all this, isn't there? A civilization so invested in a single color that it shaped policy, birthrights, clothing laws, and throne room acoustics. But then again, the Byzantines were never half-hearted. If they were going to pick a color, it would be the one that cost a fortune, stank like low tide, and made everyone else feel like peasants. And really, isn't that what empires do? As night begins to rise, you look back at the silhouette of the great palace. Shadows stretch across the walls. Somewhere, hidden beneath the surface, the porphyra still slumbers in stone. Empty. Quiet. Waiting for a child born in twilight and crowned in dye. You don't need to see it to know it's still there. The Byzantines never threw things away. As the moon rises over the Bosporus, you find yourself wandering the quieter streets of Constantinople, where everyday life hums softly beneath the grand imperial veneer. Here, purple isn't just a royal indulgence, it's a signifier, a symbol, a subtle language everyone understands, even if they don't dare speak it aloud. Imagine yourself as a merchant or a craftsman navigating this sea of purple authority. You want to flaunt status but without drawing imperial ire. So how do you show off your wealth? How do you paint yourself with just a hint of imperial hue without getting yourself into trouble? The answer lies in the art of purple imitation. You've probably heard about Tyrian purple, the costly dye made from thousands of sea snails, painstakingly collected and boiled until the liquid turned the signature reddish purple. The Byzantine emperors hoarded this like treasure. But for the average citizen? That was a pipe dream. Instead, artisans developed a palette of lesser purples and mauves, derived from cheaper dyes like madder root or even certain lichens. Some were decent facsimiles, others less so, you might spot a faded purple robe on a merchant that looked more like a bruised grape than imperial silk. Historians still argue whether these imitation dyes were truly meant to trick the elite or simply a practical nod to fashion's allure. Either way, the subtle shades became a mark of aspiration, a visual whisper saying, "I might not be the emperor, but I'm trying." One interesting tidbit: some Byzantines tried to sneak purple dye into their everyday items beyond clothes. Purple-trimmed shoes? A vase tinged with purple glaze? A simple belt dyed a suspicious shade? The occasional ambitious tailor would get caught and face a stern lecture from the city magistrate. Not harsh punishment, mind you, just a reminder that purple was the emperor's color, and you'd best stick to brown or gray if you didn't want a purple reprimand. Your stroll takes you past a small, humble shop selling jars of purple dye. Smells like briny fish guts and old seaweed. You wrinkle your nose and wonder how anyone could love this stench, but then you remember the purple's power and promise. Byzantine purple was also political theater. Wearing the wrong shade in the wrong place was practically a diplomatic faux pas. The elite even used purple seals on official documents to signify authority. Forging such a seal was akin to high treason. Imagine the scandal if a merchant's bill of sale suddenly bore the imperial purple crest. One curious anecdote involves a cleric who dared to wear purple vestments in a small village church. The bishop wasn't pleased and sent a letter reprimanding him, not for blasphemy, but for overstepping the sacred color boundary. Purple was sacred, a visual barrier between the divine, the imperial, and the mundane. You pause in the street to listen to a lute player weaving soft melodies that drift through the air like a purple mist. Even music, it seems, was touched by the empire's color obsession. Some scholars suggest that Byzantine poets and composers used purple as a metaphor for power, beauty, and mystery, a lyrical echo of the dye's physical presence. So when you finally settle into a quiet corner, perhaps sipping a spiced wine or nibbling on honey-soaked figs, you realize purple isn't just a color here, it's a feeling, a cultural heartbeat. Maybe you don't get to wear it, but you live with it. You breathe it. You dream in shades of imperial ambition and everyday compromise. Remember that odd, expensive dye? That smell? That hidden power? It's woven through the fabric of Byzantine life, visible, invisible, everywhere. And now, as your eyelids grow heavy, that purple haze softly fades to twilight, coaxing you toward dreams woven with silk and stone. The early morning light creeps through the narrow windows of a Byzantine workshop where you find yourself among the artisans who turned purple dye into art and controversy. This is the heart of the imperial dye industry, a secretive world blending alchemy, chemistry, and a fair bit of trial and error. Here, you watch as workers crush thousands of tiny murex sea snails, their shells crushed with care, the purple secretion painstakingly extracted. It's a slow, smelly process that would make modern noses wince, a pungent blend of brine, rot, and a hint of salt water. But the result? A dye so vibrant and long-lasting it was worth every fishy whiff. What you might not realize is that producing Tyrian purple wasn't just about color, it was a tightly guarded state monopoly. Only a few guilds had permission to handle this precious dye. The state controlled it like a secret recipe, passing knowledge in hushed tones, fearing competitors or spies could steal their precious technique. Historians still argue whether this monopoly was more about controlling commerce or about protecting the dye's symbolic power. Either way, the trade was lucrative and vital. Now, here's the quirky bit. Despite its high status, Tyrian purple wasn't always as purple as you imagine. The exact shade depended on the snail species, the processing technique, and even the weather. Some batches leaned more red, others toward a dusty blue, creating a subtle spectrum of purple hues that made each fabric unique. And there's more. Sometimes the dye changed color over time, shifting with exposure to sunlight or washing. A cloak might start royal purple and mellow into lavender or plum, which made wearing purple a bit of a gamble if you were aiming for imperial perfection. But purple wasn't just for robes. The Byzantines used it on banners, book bindings, and even as a pigment in manuscripts. Imagine the monks painstakingly painting tiny purple letters into illuminated texts, their brushes dipped in snail juice, a truly royal touch to religious devotion. You catch a glimpse of a workshop apprentice, carefully stirring vats and murmuring prayers. Some believed the dye had mystical properties, linking it to the divine right of emperors and the sacred aura of the city itself. Interestingly, the purple dye's story doesn't end with Byzantium. When the empire waned, the secret of Tyrian purple faded, becoming a lost art. Modern dye chemistry didn't rediscover it fully until the 19th century, sparking curiosity about how those ancient artisans achieved such a feat. You stretch, feeling the pull of the day's gentle rhythms, and notice how something as simple as a color can carry centuries of stories, mysteries, and debates. As you settle back, the scent of salt and sea lingers in your mind, and you drift gently toward sleep, wrapped in the invisible purple threads of history. You wake to a quieter part of the empire, where purple isn't just dye, it's law. Here, purple threads weave through the strict dress codes of Byzantine society, tying color directly to power and privilege. Imagine yourself walking through a bustling marketplace, your eyes drawn to the rich purple robes shimmering under the Mediterranean sun, worn only by the emperor, his family, and a handful of elite officials. Purple was so exclusive that wearing it without permission was a serious offense. Known as the sumptuary laws, these regulations dictated who could wear what colors and fabrics. Step out of line, and you might face fines, social scorn, or worse, a reminder that fashion was politics in motion. Historians still argue whether these laws were primarily about maintaining social order or simply a way to protect the lucrative purple dye trade. Whatever the reason, the colors you wore said volumes about your place in the empire. Here's a fun tidbit. Some Byzantine brides were said to wear a purple wedding veil, symbolizing their new status and connection to imperial prestige. It wasn't just about beauty, it was a statement of alliance and honor. At the same time, not all purple was created equal. The emperor's purple was richer, deeper, and often mixed with gold thread. Lesser nobles might wear lighter or faded shades, so color became a subtle but clear social language. You might smile at the thought that, in some cases, the color purple functioned as an early form of a VIP pass, a fabric passport into the highest circles of Byzantine society. Interestingly, the strictness of these dress codes waxed and waned over the centuries, with some emperors loosening restrictions while others tightened control. This ebb and flow shows how color and status were always in dialogue with politics and culture. As you stroll past the marketplace, you overhear merchants trading gossip about who wore purple last week and who got caught bending the rules. You realize the color was part theater, part law, and entirely woven into the empire's identity. As twilight approaches, the purple glow of the city's lamps seems to echo the dye's regal mystery, and you find yourself drifting deeper into the soothing rhythms of Byzantine life. You find yourself drawn into the workshops where purple dye was born, a messy, smelly, and surprisingly intricate world. Imagine narrow streets lined with vats bubbling with the secret liquid that would become imperial purple. The ancient mollusks, known as murex, were the stars here, their tiny shells crushed to extract the precious dye. Picture workers plunging their hands into cold brine, wincing as the dye slowly revealed its vibrant hue. The process was tedious and slow. It could take thousands of snails to produce just a single gram of dye. This scarcity is why purple became synonymous with luxury and power. Some scholars suggest the dye's cost was deliberately inflated by emperors to maintain its exclusivity, turning color into an economic weapon. Here's a quirky detail. Legend has it that the dye could stain skin for days, and Byzantine workers sometimes found purple hands for weeks after a long shift. It was both a badge of honor and a source of frustration. Historians still debate whether the purple trade had more influence on Byzantine foreign relations or on the empire's internal social hierarchy. The dye connected distant Mediterranean shores in a web of commerce and politics, making purple a symbol not just of status but of empire itself. While the dye's production was centered in the eastern Mediterranean, purple's allure spread far beyond, influencing fashion in Western Europe and even reaching the distant courts of Asia. The empire was a hub of color and culture, with purple as its vibrant pulse. As night falls, you imagine the weary workers heading home, their hands tinted with stubborn purple stains, a subtle reminder that behind every imperial robe was a messy, human story. You might chuckle at the thought that such a prized color started from slimy sea creatures, turning ocean muck into royal splendor, a perfect metaphor for the empire's blend of grit and grandeur. You drift into the quieter chambers of Byzantine daily life, where purple wasn't just for emperors but had practical uses too. Imagine walking through bustling markets filled with vendors selling vibrant fabrics dyed with various hues of purple, some more muted, others dazzling under the sun. The imperial purple was reserved, but lesser tones made their way into common wardrobes, subtly connecting citizens to the grandeur above. Here's a curious fact: purple was also used in medicine. Some Byzantine physicians believed purple-dyed fabrics had healing properties, especially for calming fevers or promoting restful sleep. You can almost see a weary patient draped in soft purple cloth, hoping for relief, not unlike how we today turn to cozy blankets or lavender scents. The role of purple in religious ceremonies was just as important. Monks and clergy wore purple vestments during special liturgies, symbolizing spiritual authority and humility at once, a complex balance that mirrored the empire's own contradictions. Historians still argue whether purple's sacred meaning developed independently or was influenced by earlier pagan traditions, but its significance in Byzantine worship remains undeniable. You might smile thinking about how the empire's obsession with purple extended to everyday rituals, like weddings or funerals, where the color marked transitions and status. It wasn't just a dye but a language, a silent code whispered in threads and folds. Interestingly, purple dyes could vary depending on the season and the skill of the dyer, resulting in a palette of purples that modern eyes might not easily distinguish but which spoke volumes to those in the know. The empire's textile artisans were quietly brilliant, their hands weaving stories into every piece. As you settle deeper into this world, the mingling scents of sea salt, spices, and rich dyes drift around you, an olfactory tapestry that brings the past to life in gentle waves. You glide into the quieter corners of Byzantine social life, where purple's mystique touched more than just clothes, it influenced laws and customs in subtle ways. Picture a city square where merchants and citizens move around, each aware of the unspoken rules about who could wear what, and when. Purple wasn't just a color, it was a legal statement, a visible marker of your place in society. The empire had strict sumptuary laws that regulated purple's use. Only the emperor and certain high-ranking officials could don the richest, purest purples, dyed from the rare murex snail secretions. It was a privilege fiercely protected, because if anyone else dared to wear that shade, it was considered a form of rebellion or disrespect. You can imagine the tension if a merchant accidentally sported a robe with a patch of imperial purple. Fines, public shaming, or worse, might follow. A quirky detail: some sources suggest that even animals like horses and dogs belonging to the elite might be adorned with purple ribbons or harnesses to flaunt status, because why should just people get all the glory? Historians still debate how strictly these sumptuary laws were enforced, or if they were more aspirational guidelines than ironclad rules. The purple obsession even affected Byzantine funerary customs. Emperors were often buried wrapped in purple cloth, a final symbol of their power and connection to divine rule. The rich purple fabric was thought to protect their journey into the afterlife, ensuring the empire's legacy continued in both body and spirit. You may find it amusing that despite such reverence, the process of harvesting and dyeing purple was notoriously smelly and messy. Dyers were often relegated to the outskirts of cities to avoid offending noses sensitive to the pungent scent of crushed sea snails. As you breathe in the faint ocean breeze mixed with echoes of whispered imperial decrees, the purple thread weaves ever tighter into the fabric of Byzantine life, binding its people in a shared but complicated hue. The story now drifts toward the Byzantine economy and how purple dye shaped trade and diplomacy. Imagine the bustling docks of Constantinople, where ships from distant lands unload crates filled with everything from silk to spices, but none as valuable as the precious murex shells destined for purple dye production. This rare purple pigment became a commodity that extended far beyond fashion. It was a currency of influence. You probably didn't realize that the Byzantines guarded their purple dyeing secrets with near religious fervor. Only a handful of families controlled the dye workshops, and their techniques were closely held. It's like the medieval version of a secret recipe handed down through generations, with the occasional whispered threat to any who tried to smuggle the knowledge out of the empire. A fun but slightly bizarre fact: some Byzantine emperors are rumored to have insisted on eating only foods dyed with purple or served on purple plates during grand feasts, because why stop at clothing when you can color your lunch? Historians still argue whether this was a widespread practice or just eccentric imperial vanity. This precious dye also influenced diplomacy. Gifts wrapped in purple or adorned with purple ribbons were tokens of great esteem when presented to foreign rulers. Purple was the visual language of power and respect, smoothing political alliances or, in some cases, asserting dominance. Yet, the purple trade wasn't just a Byzantine affair. Demand for the dye stretched across the Mediterranean and beyond, connecting the empire to distant cultures in a slow, shimmering web of commerce. And this demand often led to conflicts over access to the murex-rich coastal waters, small but fiercely guarded battles over the secret to purple's magic. So as you sink deeper into this story, you feel the pulse of an empire shaped not only by armies and laws but by a color so rare and rich it became its very signature on the world stage. As our journey winds down, you find yourself lingering on the cultural echoes of purple dye long after the Byzantine Empire has faded. The legacy of that regal color lingers in art, literature, and even modern fashion, a whisper from the past still coloring the present. You might notice that your favorite luxury brand's logo or a royal robe today owes something to those ancient purple hues painstakingly extracted from tiny sea snails. Interestingly, the decline of the Byzantine purple dye industry coincided with changes in trade routes and political power, reminding you how closely culture and economy dance together. Some historians still debate exactly when the secret recipes for purple dye leaked beyond Byzantine control, while others argue the changing tides of history simply made the color less exclusive, turning what was once an imperial monopoly into a more common luxury. Picture, for a moment, the quiet workshops on the shores of the Mediterranean, faint smells of brine and crushed shells mingling with the hum of artisans' chants and the slow drying of fabrics dyed in liquid twilight. The artisans worked in shadows, their craft both precious and humble, a delicate balance between nature and human ingenuity. As you drift closer to sleep, consider how such a small mollusk could leave such a large imprint on history. The Byzantine obsession with purple was not just about vanity or wealth, it was about identity, power, and the delicate threads that weave civilizations together. So let the softness of this story settle over you, the gentle ebb and flow of ancient seas, the slow turning of history's wheel, and the rich color that stained not only garments but the very soul of an empire. Now, as the story gently closes, imagine the soothing sounds of the Mediterranean waves lapping quietly against sun-warmed shores. The salty breeze whispers softly, carrying hints of ancient seashells and faded imperial courts. The busy world of purple dye workshops fades into a calm hush, and the colors slowly dissolve into a twilight dream. You breathe out slowly, releasing the day's weight as the rich purple hues blend into twilight's gentle blues and grays. The long journey through Byzantium's secret colors has been a quiet reminder that history is full of small wonders, delicate mysteries that shaped empires and touched lives in the most unexpected ways. Let your thoughts drift like a slow river, winding through time's quiet corners, where artisans ground tiny shells and emperors wrapped themselves in power, wrapped in purple. You may never see that color again quite the same way. Rest now, knowing you've traveled with the past, feeling its textures, scents, and soft echoes. The world outside will wait, still and steady, while your mind wanders gently through history's tender embrace. Sleep well, wrapped in the soft, lingering glow of a story told just for you.